Hello, gamers. Welcome back to another episode of the Cuddlepunk Podcast. I am your host, the mastermind, Veronica Vext. It is far too hot in Chicago. If you have a problem with the AC being on, I don't care. It's too hot today, not just because of the heat in Chicago, because we have one of the hottest people coming out of Missouri on the show today. She is both Mega Faggot and Robo Bitch. She is the only good Twitter bot. Eleanor Bebop is on the show today. Ellie, how you doing today?
Doing all right. Hanging in there.
Hanging in. That's all that any of us can fucking do at this point.
For real.
Let's get started with, I just said you're from Missouri. Missouri is a weird place for music, I feel like, because you've got like stuff like Get Up Kids and like Nathaniel Rateliff and all of this like alternative indie side of things. Then you've also got like Tech Nine and Chris Calico on the other side of things. How much of the Missouri scene itself plays into like what you're influenced by?
So it does and it doesn't. I mean, obviously, like 100 Gex and stuff like that, they're from St. Louis originally, and all that stuff. It's kind of hit and miss because I like to pull influences from a lot of different places. And local music is a big part of it. I was really involved in like the DIY scene, especially like punk, hardcore stuff like that, metalcore, pretty much that whole corner of genres. But at the same time, I mean, I feel like I pull influence from a lot of local bands from other places as well, or local artists from other locations. So more so, I focus on like people that I think are great breaking ground. I'm not a huge fan of hearing things I've heard before, if that makes sense.
From hearing your music, I can definitely tell that
Yeah,
you're more into like the like pushing boundaries side of things. And
absolutely.
you can even tell that from like the different eras that you've had for your career, all the different names of different projects. Let's go through real quick all of the different projects that you've had so
That's a
far.
lot.
Yeah, it's a lot. And all the
Okay,
different names that
so
you've had so far too, because you've got different
right,
names for each
yeah,
project.
obviously. So starting out, I was mostly in bands. In high school, I didn't learn any instruments. I had a guitar, but I didn't really commit to it when I was younger. I was more worried about like just dealing with like social stuff like that. And really didn't put time into it. Kind of spent a lot of time with escapism, video games, that type of shit. My first band, we wrote a whole one song, recorded it on like a laptop microphone, like one instrument at a time. It was absolutely god awful. It was called Draw Your Last Breath. No, Save Your Last Breath. Draw Your Last Breath was a real band that did real stuff. After that, I started being in like real bands that did stuff. My first band was Companion. It was kind of an emotional, hardcore kind of Defeater style. We got compared to Defeater a lot. Style, just kind of like emotional hardcore band. And then like half of that band after that split up, started another band called Greyjoy because it's a dope name for a band, even if it is from Game of Thrones. Our guitarist came up with that. Band went for a while, and then I moved away. And that was when I kind of started focusing really on like solo music. I fucked around with instruments a little bit, drums, guitar, anything I could get my hands on. There's a mandolin behind me, just anything. I've got kalimba, any random, even if it's like yard sale quality. And I started getting into that, and I started a bunch of projects, kind of rapid fire. It's hard to tell what order they were in. There was like my noise rock, like post rock type thing, Child of God, which was pretty fun. That was a lot of that was when I was experimenting with any instrument any noise. Like I'd be slamming doors and okay, time to sample that, just like whatever I could on that project. And early on, a lot of my recording was like on a phone. It was like on GarageBand because first of all, it's significantly cheaper and it came with my phone. But second of all, cheaper, yo-ho. But at the end of the day, I moved up to a real DAW. I use Fruity Loops, but I'm not an elitist about that sort of thing. I don't really care. Use Reaper for all I care. But that was when I really started leaning into like the Heli Bebop, and I wasn't sure what I wanted to do with it initially,
Yeah, a lot of the
and I
Heli
just kind
Bebop
of
stuff
got
that's on there is a very like it's a lot more it's mostly instrumental stuff that you've got on the Heli Bebop name on
right.
Bandcamp.
On Bandcamp, yeah, and then on SoundCloud because I went through phases. So I started on Bandcamp because I was just doing like electronic stuff, a lot of sample flip type stuff, and then I went to SoundCloud with it, and that was when I was kind of doing like what I call like dumb bitch juice music, like 100 gex stuff that's just about like getting fucked up basically. And I just kind of it didn't do anything for me spiritually to make that music. It's dope. I love it. I listen to it. It's great. Puts you in a good mood. Super energetic. But I wanted to be. I have a lot inside that I need to get out, and I wasn't doing it with that. So that was when I kind of started leaning more into like industrial, and like I started listening to like a lot more experimental like artists like Sophie and stuff like that during kind of when PC music was blowing up within the queer community. Um, yeah, so that's I'm sure there's other projects that I put some time into at one time or another. I had a like an electronic project when I was like 20 that was like I think it was called Posthuman. I think it was named after a Marilyn Manson song. That's cringe. But yeah, it was just anytime I really had a dramatic change in what sound I was doing, I felt like, well, this deserves a new project and this deserves a new name. But the most noteworthy in terms of just fun to talk about project that I've ever been in, I started a band with a friend of mine who also turned out to be trans. And at the time, neither of us were out, but we called it Boy Cunt. And it was just kind of like we were both just straight dudes as far as we knew. And we were just like, what if we did something that was like really sass and like really queer and stuff? And like everyone else that was in the band was kind of like so on it. But me and my friend Kim, shout out Kim, if you're in Portland, she DJs and stuff, so hit her up. But when she was here, we had that band, and again, didn't really do much with it, but I feel like it was really formative for at least for me as both a queer person and as a musician, and finally a queer musician. Just having that weird backstory really kind of helped drive me to like maybe I don't have to make what everyone else is making. And then here we are. Now I've got, what I've been making recently and what's releasing tomorrow at the time we're recording this. Um, so yeah, super varied background. I change lanes a lot, but at the end of the day, I make what I like. I make what I want to hear, what I haven't heard, and that's what I'm doing now.
That's that comes across a lot in the stuff that you're making right now, particularly with the new. How do you pronounce the new single? Because it's got that 3 at the beginning.
Yeah.
I love the new single so much. I love because we've been working on stuff together, which we'll get into. But what I love
Right.
so much about the stuff that you are working on currently is the direct political side of things, like the specifically like with the when you are like talking about like every trans suicide is a murder and having that bit at the
Yeah.
end where it's the like news coverage of how many uh queer youth are in
Right.
danger in the South.
Yeah.
What I love about it specifically is that there's not a demonization of the South itself and the queer kids in the South,
Right. Well, I
because
mean, I go ahead. My
no,
bad.
I just it frustrates me all the time when people say like that we need to abandon the South, or like even just recently when people were talking about Chapel Roan playing North Carolina and getting all pissy about it. Like there are kids there who need to hear that shit.
Right, right, exactly. I forget where I heard this. I think it was on the Gender Reveal podcast actually with Tuck Woodstock. But somewhere I heard that a statistic that like per capita, you're more likely to run into queer people in the deep south in America than anywhere else, including Portland and San Francisco, like
Of
by
course.
population. And
Because the
that's
queer
been
kids
years
can't
ago that
afford
I
to
heard
move
that.
anywhere. The queer kids can't afford
Right,
to move
right,
anywhere.
right. And I'm not I know people in the real South, and I know I'm being a Missourian, I'm in like the faux South. The state was split during the, divide and everything like that during the Civil War. So I'm not claiming necessarily to be from the South, but more South adjacent because I see things that happen, like with what happened with Nex and Arkansas, or Oklahoma rather, borders Missouri, Oklahoma, all the laws that they're passing there, everything there that's not great. Missouri shares more land borders with other states than any other state. So I'm constantly being aware because these things tend to travel interstate when it comes to political issues, stuff like that, which that's getting into some weird sociology stuff. But at the end of the day, I feel a strong kinship for people in the South, queers in the South, because much like them, I feel at current that I'm kind of in a state of being trapped in a place that doesn't want me here, but doesn't give me ample opportunity to get out either. Um, and it's a big catch 22, and it's a recurring theme in a lot of the lyrics on the EP actually is not just the South, but just like any community anywhere has queer people in it. Like, and even if they're not open about it at that time, whether it's, there's queer Republican senators, there's queers in the Klan, there's queers everywhere. They may not have actualized it, but um, and obviously I judge the Klan more harshly than I judge just the South broadly,
Of course.
especially with where I'm from, being such kind of a central area to the Klan as an organization. It really, that's not forgivable by any stretch of the imagination, but because of that and because of the cultural similarities that I have with people and things that I see people going through in the South, obviously there's laws in Florida and there's laws in other states in the South that are worse than they are here at the time at this current time, but it's the same fight. And there's people down there fighting, and I'm not gonna say, oh, I hope that global warming. Oh no, they're gonna, the South needs protected. Queers in the South need protected, and that's kind of why I included that news clip, that sample in the end there was just kind of, it's bad for all of us. If you're queer anywhere, you're like, oh hey, it's bad outside. Like, I want to go out in public slightly less often than I did, a couple of years ago, even while I was out. So things are bad, and I don't need to point that out to people, but we still need to take stock and like there are parts of this country that are getting it a lot harder. And that's not to discredit other states either, like Idaho and places regionally not connected to where kind of the epicenter of transphobia is happening right now in America.
Yeah.
Um, but still, nonetheless, like it's horrible what's happening all over the place. I feel like I'm kind of rambling on, but at the end of the day, queers are
Every person
everywhere.
says
Protect
that they're
them.
scared of rambling on the show. Like that's the whole point of this.
Okay,
You
that
can ramble as much as you
challenge
want to.
accepted.
Perfect.
Challenge accepted.
One of the two influences that I personally hear the most in the current stuff that you're making are obviously Nine Inch Nails. And then
Right.
we were talking about this, the like East Coast side of hip hop, especially, is bleeding into your
Right.
more hip hop style thing. I know you have, this is a question that I have on here. I know your answer, and I know that it's the answer that I have as well because you have the tattoo of him, but Biggie versus
Right.
Biggie or Pac.
So that's a really complicated question, actually, more so than you may realize. So my girlfriend's from California, and despite I do have a tattoo of Biggie Smalls, we've reached an agreement that it's kind of that they don't have to be better. Like, that whole beef, that Diddy and Suge Knight can have that. They can deal with that. I respect both of them greatly for their impact on music, their impact on hip hop, and also just culturally, like the impacts that they had both while they were alive and posthumously. Like they're just both unequivocally legends. But on the low, you can't fuck with Biggie's flow.
You
Like
can't.
he's the illest.
He's the illest. I'd put him. Of any of the like '90s rappers to do
Right.
to like that people still talk about. He, I think, is just in. He, you can never take him out of the top five, in my opinion.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of East Coast actually, because while we're getting into my influences regarding hip hop, not so much on purpose, but earlier on when I started getting into hip hop and started appreciating it a lot more, because again, it wasn't something that I came across on accident in, where I'm from and where I came up at. I mean, I did, but in a weird way, in a weird context. But like when I started actively listening to hip hop, I took a weird road to hip hop because it was through like Death Grips and artists in that vein, like Sub Pop and like clipping stuff like that, like really experimental hip hop. Just because I was getting into really experimental metal, and it kind of there was a bleed over, and I kind of just followed it and wound up, getting into Biggie, obviously. But a lot of East Coast was what drew me in originally, because I'm Jay-Z because of the Linkin Park collab album thing. So I was at least aware of a Jay-Z, which who's not at this point.
Right.
But like Nas and the whole Queensbridge area, Wu-Tang, all that shit. Like that was something that I not only got into musically, but like culturally because of the similarities with like 90s like New York hardcore and like East Coast like hardcore scenes. And I have a tendency to be a bit of a historian with any hobby or interest I get. I'm like, well, I want to know like how they got there. Like whether it's learning about like straight edge gangs and hardcore in the 90s and early 2000s, or like, anything. I like to know what was happening in the culture when the music was made so it can kind of inform what the song is about, in my mind as far as like what was intended. And then obviously I like to draw my own conclusions from lyrics and songs, and especially ones that kind of aged into being somehow more relevant today than they were when they were written, stuff like that. So yeah, East Coast hip hop was where I kind of started with hip hop, and then I kind of went into like the South, and then like into like 3 6 and then horrorcore stuff, Suicide Boys, and then I went into like West Coast and really got into a lot of like the conscious West Coast rappers. Really, really stood out to me both like vibes wise, just like really kind of just fun, summery. I've never been to California, but it's what California sounds like to me. Like stuff that's like, especially the more like introspective and emotional, like Tupac's discography, but also just it's kind of impossible to learn about hip hop history without learning about like NWA and like, just the whole West Coast scene and the East Coast West Coast beef. And that introduced me to a lot of West Coast artists. So as far as hip hop goes, there's that. And then you mentioned 9 Inch Nails, huge influence. Definitely an artist that I feel like I don't know if it's intentional on his part, but like he's written a lot of songs that like as a trans person I relate to with my experience of transness, like only. I remember the first time I heard that, it was actually I saw the music video. It was on MTV. I hadn't seen it, and it was early in the internet era, so it wasn't my instinct to go look it up on the internet. So I just like happened to see it on MTV or something. And first of all, the music video blew me away. The music video is what really made me appreciate like artists who focus on every aspect of their art, because like anyone can technically make a music video. You just set video to sounds, but having like the desk toys and things in the music video for Only moving around and stuff, that really blew me away just creatively, but also just the lyrics like of that song. I always related so deeply to them, and I didn't understand why until like years later. I was like just kind of really deeply listening to the lyrics for the first time in years, and I was like, oh, that's why I related to this song for since the moment I heard it. It's because it was, Trent was trying to help me out. He was trying to tell me something. That song was for me specifically, so nobody else can have it. And there's other songs as well, but that's the one that really stood out to me in my transition personally as like something that kind of flipped a switch in my brain where it was just like, be girl now though? Like, can I do that yet? And, it was still years before I came out, but came out slightly before the pandemic. So I barely got to experience that. That was pretty cool. 9 Inch Nails. Good dude, backed hard.
9 Inch Nails, I think, because I'm not as much of a 9 Inch Nails person, but
Right,
we share a love of Death Grips, who is a band that's very
right,
clearly influenced by 9 Inch Nails, and I think there's the
right,
reason why so many trans women like are drawn to Nine Inch Nails and drawn to Death Grips is because the main theme of both of those bands' music is paranoia and just fear in
Right.
general.
And
And
like also just like the kind of aesthetic theme of just like dystopia and like being somewhere that you're not welcome. Like that's what I relate to the most is just, and it's probably geographic for me. Why I relate to that part so much is just I'm, when there's a song about like not being welcome or everything, everyone's watching me and stuff like that. Like it's hard not to relate to it as a trans person living somewhere where that is actually my lived experience. Um, just in my life outside of the walls of my house, which is whatever. I ain't sweating it, but people can be wrong. That's fine. But yeah, the dystopia I think is really because a lot of stuff that's not explicitly trans, but integral to the trans community and like trans culture, stuff like Fallout and stuff, it's all dystopian. It's
it's all
all like everything is got screwed up by bad people because they didn't listen to the good people. And it's a recurring theme. It's a recurring theme in the music and the movies that are associated with transness. Not everything obviously, but a lot of it, a lot of trans people are drawn to that sort of, not necessarily 1984, but like V for Vendetta type of fighting back, and I love to see it. I love that that's such a deep vein in the fabric of our culture. It's one of the best things about being trans is having that culture that I kind of I came out and then I saw the culture and I was like, well, obviously I'm trans. I how have I not known all this time? All of my hobbies were already trans. Everything I liked was already apparently trans. Not to say that I don't appreciate when cis people like those things too, but like it's not yours. You're not allowed to have it anymore. We put that flag in the ground.
speaking of cis people appreciating Nine Inch Nails, I think for myself and for a lot of other people, our introduction to Nine Inch Nails was the song Closer. And that song has inspired so many bands and inspired so many bands to cover that song. And some bands do it great and some bands don't do it that great. When we come back, Eleanor Bebop and I will be doing a tier list. Everybody loves tier lists of a bunch of different covers of the song Closer by Nine Inch Nails. We will be right back with more of the Cuddlepunk Podcast. Welcome back to the Cuddlepunk Podcast. I am here once again with Miss Eleanor Bebop. One of the ways that everybody gets into Nine Inch Nails is through the song Closer, probably their biggest song still to this day, if you don't count Hurt, which is basically just Johnny Cash's song at this point. A lot of people have tried to cover this song Closer by Nine Inch Nails, and not everybody is able to do it great. Some people are, but not everybody. So, what Helly and I are going to do right now is we are going to be doing a tier list of covers of the song Closer by Nine Inch Nails. I've got 7 here for us. Ellie, are
Oh
you
yeah,
ready to go?
maybe as I'll ever be.
Alrighty. First off, and this might have been, I will be honest with you, this might have been my first exposure to this song. It is Asking Alexandria's cover from 2014's Punk Goes 90s Volume 2 from Fearless Records. This is from the ill-fated Dennis Stoff era of Asking Alexandria when Danny Warsnop had left to go to rehab and do a bunch of other dumb
Okay.
shit.
And become a cowboy, yeah.
Yes, exactly. Are
Yeah.
you familiar with this cover?
No, I'm not actually. I don't know that I've consciously heard any covers of this song.
We'll do it based on what I've heard some bunch of these. We'll just do it based on what we
Right.
think the vibe is going to be.
That works for me.
Alrighty. So the Asking Alexandria cover, it is better than you would expect an Asking Alexandria cover of Closer to Be.
I mean, the thing that I think about that is like obviously having not heard the song, but being kind of familiar with that era of Asking Alexandria, like I wouldn't expect it to be bad. Like I know it's like fun to like shit on the scene bands from back in the day and everything, but like Asking Alexandria had some of the better like production and technical skill at that time within the genre. Um, and obviously there's a lot of controversial figures in that scene at the time. But musically, I would be shocked if it was awful. Um, just on vibes alone, if I had to guess, I would probably have guessed that it would be a high B. Most people wouldn't admit to being there. Yeah,
I
something
would
like
agree with
that.
that. I would agree with that for sure. Yeah, I would put it in a B. It's definitely not the best, and it's pretty straightforward in terms of a cover. But
Right.
in terms of like a screamy cover of Closer, I think this is
Yeah.
probably as good as you're going to be able to do.
Right. Right. And I mean, to be honest, a lot of times those punk goes whatever albums, like it's not like they were picking songs they didn't like or care about. You know what I mean? So a lot of times I feel like they were kind of setting themselves up to succeed to an extent, or at least had an idea for what they wanted to do. Not in every case. Some of them it was just like silly or like I don't know. I'm sure there are other kinds of songs, but I remember them all being either silly or like surprisingly faithful adaptations with like a spin on it.
There's at least 1 to 2 good covers on each of the Punkos albums, at least in my
Right.
opinion.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Like Flagpole Sitta by Chiodos. That was a pretty good
Exactly.
one. Like that one. But yeah, not all of them. Some of them were just silly, like that. What was the song? Still Fly by the Devil Wears
Oh
Prada.
my god, I
That
forgot
that
when they
was
did
just
Still
goofy.
Fly.
That was just goofy. Or
Punko's Crunk in its entirety was a mistake.
right. I mean it was and it wasn't. Because
True.
like was it good? No. Absolutely not. Certainly not. Was it fun? Very much so. It
The
was
bet
especially at the time when like this is like I'm just putting myself back there mentally. Like everyone I know is like gradually getting their driver's licenses. Anytime we go out, there's at least two people with shutter shades on. Like I'm just putting myself mentally there. And I'm like, you know what? In spite of how corny and like awful that era was in terms of like just kind of the edginess of the culture of alternative music at the time. It was what it was, but it was fun. It was a fun time to be a teenager. I'm not mad about it.
Next up we have Father John Misty's cover. This is one that he did live.
I would kind of expect it to be like shockingly good
Yeah.
or like a surprise that like I it's gonna be an extreme. I feel like it's not gonna be fall in the middle
What I
with
like
Father John Misty.
what I like about FJM's cover of it is Father John Misty is just a sad boy in general. So he at least gets the emotion behind it. I think I'd put this one as well in a B. I'm just not a fan of I'm not a fan of the song in the style that he does it in,
Right,
but it's
right.
objectively very, very good.
Okay, yeah. So I mean, I tend to be super forgiving of just art in general, so I
Of
would
course.
probably rank it really high, but
We'll put it in A. We'll put it in A for right
yeah,
now.
just have it fall in like an average spot there. I feel like my favorite covers are the ones where it's just like, why would you cover that in that style?
I'm actually
You
going to put
know,
this
like,
one in S because I can guarantee you it is not going to get better from here.
okay, we'll go ahead and just put it in S then. And
We'll put it in S
that's gonna
then.
be the first one I listen to after this. I'm gonna find out if I was right.
Amazing.
Um, but yeah, I do tend to like the ones where it's just like, what genre was that, you know, originally when people do covers? Because it just changing it so dramatically is bold, but I love it. I love when people are bold.
Absolutely. In this moment's cover from their album Blood, this is something that's just a personal thing for me. I fucking hate In This Moment.
I had a very brief phase of like really liking that band for a week when I was younger, and I don't think that album even existed at that time. It might have. It might have. My memory is all fucked on when stuff happened. But yeah, I wouldn't expect much from that. They're a niche of a genre that if you really like it, it's cool, but I got burnt out so fast on just like their
Red State Butt
specific
Rock.
right, yeah. Yeah, and the same thing like obviously before they had been so vocal about their views, and also before I was old enough to know that artists had views and weren't just up there singing songs. I had a similar thing where I listened to Five Finger Death Punch for like 3 days in high school, and
I've
then I
seen
was
Five
just
Finger
like, oh
live.
wait, this is. I was like, oh wait, this is they're playing this. It's the AC/DC of like top metal. Like,
Yeah,
it very quickly grew one note. But anyway, with this cover, I am not.
I'm feeling a
I
C
would
for
say
this
that's
one.
probably, yeah, yeah.
It's
I feel
not the
like it,
worst, but it's not
yeah,
great. It's certainly not
yeah.
great.
Because I mean, they're good at what they do. I'm sure I would respect it on that level, but like, it's just not for me. It's not my. It's too like traditional of a genre of metal. Like leans more on the traditional side. So yeah, I'm comfortable with
It's a
C.
very straightforward cover too. So that's what I think that bumps it down at a couple of notches because I'm not for
Right.
covers where it's just like doing the exact same thing as the original
Yeah,
track.
yeah, exactly.
Next up, speaking of certainly you cannot say that this band did it the exact same as Nine Inch Nails. We have Maroon 5 covering Closer by Nine Inch Nails.
Was this before or after he started singing exclusively in falsetto?
This
Because
was
that's
before.
gonna.
This was before.
This
This was
was
around like the
before.
songs about Jane era, I'm pretty sure.
Okay. I mean that gains at some points because I feel like
I don't
as
want to
soon as he started singing in falsetto, they were super sellout. But pre falsetto, Maroon 5 was okay. Like as far as that genre of pop,
for
like,
sure.
you know, whatever genre they are.
I'm definitely gonna put it in C because again, it's still not the worst one that we have
Right.
here for sure.
Right on. I'm
But
comfortable with that.
it's Maroon 5. It's a if you
Yeah.
expect it is better than what you expect from a cover of Closer by Maroon
Right.
5.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm not surprised by that actually.
This one is very interesting. This is from Maxwell's MTV Unplugged, and it is a much more straightforward, like trying to make this song actually sexy instead of like obviously the song is sexy, but it's sexy in a
Yeah,
really fucked up way and not in
right,
like a
like
romantic.
ominously.
Yeah,
Ominously, in more of a Deftones way, which is
precisely.
more effective in my opinion.
This
Um,
this one is more of a like straight bedroom anthem, and I think
oh,
it's
they,
interesting for sure.
I mean, the thing about that is, on one hand, I feel like that that does meet the criteria of like playing it in a way that it wasn't originally, which is something I like. Um, but it's definitely got to lose points from just like making like a bedroom like it was already fine for that. You didn't
Yeah.
need to like make it sultry. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So that's
It's
where
like
I stand on that.
this song is the equivalent of the makeover of the goth girl in the Breakfast Club, where it's like you're making her prettier in your eyes, but just taking away all of the personality.
Right. Right. Yeah, it's like an acoustic cover of Living Dead Girl by Rob Zombie.
Exactly.
Like it's like you can do it. It's possible, but why? Why would you make it?
I'd personally put it in B just because it's very well done and very well performed. But again, and
You
it's
know,
like a new take on it, but I think it's very middle of the road.
yeah, I'm comfortable with that.
Next up, we have a live version from MGMT from back in their college days, back when they were first starting the band off, making pop music, ironically, and then ended up blowing up.
There's a lot of standouts of artists that I was really into like late high school for like a couple of weeks and then like never listened to again. That's a recurring theme here, which is cool. They at least obviously listen to cool artists if they're covering Nine Inch Nails. That being said, I don't know if they need to cover this song. There are Nine Inch Nails songs that I'm like, that could be interesting
I
in
think
their
MGMT
style,
covering Head Like
but
a Hole would be a lot of fun.
right, exactly. Yeah.
I think what a lot of these come down to is just like bands and artists picking the biggest song from an artist they like because they
Right.
want to show it up, which like is never the way that you should go when it comes to something like
Yeah.
this.
No, if you're wanting to appeal to like the fans of an artist with a cover of one of their songs, you need to get like not their biggest song, but like the song that like fans lose their shit at the show to. You know what I
Exactly.
mean? Like, can you cover a Welcome to the Black Parade? Sure. Would it be cooler if you covered Cemetery Drive? Yes. Like,
Yes.
you know, it's just one of those things where the biggest song is often been played enough that nobody needs to hear it in another style, but
Right.
like the deeper cuts that are like popular with the fan base, those do a lot better. If I had to guess, I would put them high B, low A, just because it's again, it's one of those things where I feel like it does in a way make sense for them to cover it, but it also kind of doesn't.
I'd put it in
And
A just
but
because
yeah,
it
that's
seems like they're having a lot of fun covering it, and it's a
well,
I don't
and
know.
like who I would imagine they have a lot of fun.
Yeah,
Like that seems to be kind of their driving force for the, and then the second thing is like whatever message they have that they want to put into their really trippy
of course.
lyrics that probably don't mean anything.
Finally, speaking of bands covering the biggest songs by certain artists, we have Palais Royale's cover of Nine Inch Nails. And if you don't mind, real quick, I'm gonna take over real quick. Palais Royale sucks. They were never good. Now that we have My Chemical Romance back, there is no need for them to ever cover teenagers ever again. There's no need for any band to cover teenagers again, especially not Palais Royale. There is nothing interesting about what they're doing. It's like they are the Greta Van Fleet of scene bands, and I really do not care for them whatsoever.
Okay, well, I'm cool with that.
I just think they're boring
That's
as hell.
fine. I I mean, I would say they probably are because I never went out of my way to like know what they sound like. Like I'm sure I've heard them, but it's just not something that's hit my radar. Um, but it sounds like something that I would be like, oh yeah, that's boring. I heard this before. So I'm gonna call that good.
For
I'm
sure.
comfortable with that.
Alrighty, we have our tier list of covers of Closer by Nine Inch Nails. Eleanor Bebop, thank you so much for being on this episode of the Cuddlepunk Podcast. Where can we find you?
I've got music up on Spotify. I'm on Twitter. It's at Eleanor Bebop. That's pretty much it, honestly. I'm an internet recluse, as it were. So, but yeah, Spotify, Apple Music, everywhere that DistroKid uploads to, you can find my music there. There's a lot of variety, but it's out there.
As you are listening to this episode right now, once you're done listening or watching this, you should go over and listen to Passion and Pain, the brand new single from Eleanor Bebop. It is such an amazing song. I hope you all go and listen to it. Ellie has got the EP coming up. We've got some stuff that we're working on together that we're coming up with
Absolutely.
in a
Yeah.
little bit that we will be teasing later on. We gotta keep them in suspense. That's the most
Yeah,
important part out of
yeah,
all
of
of this.
course. Yeah, there's a mysterious thing in the near to distant future that will happen, and y'all should be watching for it.
Y'all should definitely be watching for it. Links to all of Ellie's stuff will be available in the description of this video, as well as links to my link tree, where you can find video and audio versions of the very podcast you're watching or listening to right now. If you like what you see here and you want to see more, you can please leave a like on the video, comment down below what your favorite Nine Inch Nails song is or what your favorite cover of Closer by Nine Inch Nails is. Please subscribe. Please share this with people. Please subscribe not only on the video version, but also on all audio versions of the podcast. If you like this and you want to help support the show, you can please subscribe and pledge to the Cuddlepunk Podcast Patreon. The logo for the Cuddlepunk Podcast is done by Lauren Young. You can find her Instagram in the description. The theme song for the Cuddlepunk Podcast is Lose a Turn by Modify. You can find links to her stuff in the description down below. Ellie, Eleanor Bebop, thank you so much for being on this episode. This was great.
Yeah, absolutely. It was fun.